The chime that ended the lecture hall session did not stop the questions. Miss Reike had expected that. She always did on the day she brought up the Shadow War. 3 days had passed since the class was dismissed mid-sentence, and in that time she had watched the rumor mill do exactly what she knew it would. Fill in the gaps she'd left open with speculation far more frightening than the truth. So when the students filed back into the sealed lecture hall, shutters already drawn before she'd even asked, she allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Sit," she said, and they sat, faster than she'd ever seen them move for a lesson before. A young point named Ashel was the first to speak, his 4 eyes blinking in an asynchronous pattern that betrayed his nerves. "You said there was a war happening right now among the humans. Hiding from us?" "I said there was a war happening among humans that most of the Confederation chooses not to look at too closely," Miss Reike corrected gently, setting a new memory card into the wall display. "There's a difference. Denial isn't the same as ignorance. We know. We simply prefer the comfortable version of the story." The display flickered to life, showing a data feed of a species distribution map, not stars or planets, but population density charts overlaid with small red markers scattered across dozens of systems. "These are confirmed incidents," she said. "Rogue human predators, intercepted before they could cause what our reports delicately call significant loss of civilian life. Look at the count." Tynel, the black-furred Ural who had been so pleased with herself days earlier for sniffing out gossip in a sweater, leaned forward until her nose nearly touched the console. "That's a lot of red dots." "It's 4,206, Miss Reike said, "across 11 years, and that is only the ones we caught." Now she tapped the console, and a second layer of data loomed over the first, this one gold instead of red. "These are the interceptions, the judicial predators. The humans who found their own kind first, before we even knew there was a problem." The class went very quiet. 4,190, she continued, "out of 4,206. The Confederation's combined intelligence networks, our finest psychics, our best trackers, across 9 species. We found 16. The humans found the rest, themselves, before we even knew to look." A Carolyn near the back, his long tail curled protectively around his own chair leg, raised a clawed hand. "Why would they do that? Hunt their own people? Doesn't that make them the same as the ones they're hunting?" "That is the question every species asks first," Miss Reike said, and there was something almost fond in her voice, like she'd been waiting years for someone to ask it properly. "And it's the wrong question. The right question is, what does it cost them to do it?" She pulled up a new image. A woman, mid-30s by human aging standards, sitting in a debrief room somewhere that was clearly designed for humans. Too much beige, too many rectangular shapes, a coffee cup half finished on the table in front of her. Her eyes were the kind of tired that didn't come from lack of sleep. "This is Agent Renata Cole," Miss Reike said. "Confederation Special Intercession Human Division, Track Team 7. I'm permitted to show you this because the footage has been declassified for education. Watch." She tapped the console again, and the still image gave way to motion. The recording had no sound at first, just Agent Cole sitting across from an empty chair, waiting. Then a second human entered frame, younger, wearing a jacket with a Confederation Supply Corps patch on the shoulder. He sat. He smiled. Agent Cole did not smile back. "You've been skimming rations from the outer settlements. The audio finally cut in, translated in flat Confederation standard beneath the original human speech. 11 shipments. 11. Marcus. I can explain. You don't have to. I already know why. Money's good on the black exchange out past the perimeter. I get it. I do. Agent Cole's voice was calm, almost kind. What I need you to explain is the 14 people in Sector 9 who didn't get their medical resupply because of it. 3 of them were kids. The man's face changed, not to fear, to something colder, something that had clearly been rehearsed. They're not even our species. Who cares? The recording cut there hard, a jagged edit that made several students flinch. I'm not permitted to show you what happens next, Miss Reike said quietly into the sudden silence. Not because it's classified, because it isn't necessary for the lesson, and because Agent Cole herself asked that it not be shown in classrooms. She said, and I quote her directly because I think it matters, let them learn the why, not the how. Ashel's eyes had all gone wide and still. Did she? She turned him into human military tribunal 3 hours later. Miss Reike said, uninjured, filed the report herself, went home, ate dinner, came back to work the next morning. She let that sit. That is the part that unsettles people more than the violence does, if I am being honest with you. Not that she could have hurt him, that she didn't, even though every scan we have of human neurochemistry tells us the urge was there, sharp and immediate, the moment he said those words. And that if he had touched one of those children instead of merely costing them medicine, the outcome of that room would have been very different, and she would have walked out just as calmly. A murmur went through the room, not the murmur of confusion, the murmur of things clicking into place. So the reluctant killer and the judicial killer set a green-scaled opticin near the front, working through it aloud. They're not different types of humans, exactly. They're the same human at different points. Closer, Miss Reike said, pleased. Every human carries both. The overwhelming majority live their entire lives never crossing that line even once. But the capacity sits there, quiet, the way a bank sits at the edge of a river, invisible right up until the water rises high enough to prove it was always the reason the water didn't simply spread everywhere at once. She let the metaphor breathe, then continued. Agent Cole's team has 11 members, all human, all volunteers, and I want you to sit with that word, because in 9 years teaching this course, I have never once had a student from another species volunteer to hunt their own kind's worst examples for a living. It is by every psychological metric we have one of the most damaging jobs available to a sentient being. Confederation counselors who study Track Team 7 describe something they call moral erosion, the slow cost of being the one who has to look at a person who could be your neighbor, your friend, your child's teacher, and recognize, before anyone else does, that the shape of a monster is starting to show through the shape of a man. Why do they keep doing it, then? Tynel asked, quieter now. Because someone has to, Miss Reike said simply. And because, and this took Confederation researchers almost 4 years of study to understand, so don't feel behind if it takes you a moment too, humans have an extraordinarily specific relationship with guilt. It does not fade for them the way it fades for most of the species in this room. It compounds. A human who fails to stop a preventable harm carries that failure the way the rest of us carry old scars, permanently and in a way that changes how they move through the world afterward. Agent Cole is not haunted by the man she nearly hurt. She is haunted every day by the 11 shipments she didn't catch in time. The wall display shifted again, this time to a memorial wall, rows and rows of small plaques, human script beneath each one, names scrolling in a language most of the students couldn't read. "This is the wall at the track team training compound on Earth," Miss Reike said. "Every name on it is a rogue predator who was stopped. Not killed, in most cases, stopped, contained, sent to one of 3 secure facilities built specifically to hold the ones whose minds could not be repaired. The wall isn't a trophy wall. Humans don't display their victories that way, not for this. It's called, in their language, the ledger. And beneath every name is a second name, smaller the agent or team responsible. Agent Cole's name appears 143 times. Someone in the back, a young Carolyn, whose tail had gone rigid and still, made a small sound. 143, Miss Reike repeated. 1 species, 9 years. 1 team out of dozens operating across human space alone. She turned back to face them fully, arms folding beneath the same soft gray sweater she always wore. "I tell you this not to frighten you further, though I understand it likely will. I tell you this because it is the piece of the puzzle every other species leaves out when they whisper about the humans in hallways and supply queues. They tell you about Company 13. They tell you about the Traffico incident. They tell you about the 4,006 red dots on a map, and they let you imagine an entire species built only for slaughter." She tapped the console 1 final time, and the display returned to the still image of Agent Cole, tired eyes, half a cup of cold coffee. "What they leave out is the 4,190 gold ones, the humans who spend their lives standing between the rest of us and the worst version of their own kind, at a cost to themselves that none of us in this room, with our steadier minds and our lighter guilt, can fully imagine. Humanity did not simply produce predators, children. It produced hunters willing to turn that same hunger toward guarding the herd instead of culling it. That is not an accident of biology. That is a choice made new every single day by every one of them who could have looked away and didn't." A hand went up near the front. Cedric, the Carolyn who had spoken up during the previous lesson about murder counts. "Miss Reike, what happens to a human who fails? Who finds the line too late? Something shifted behind her eyes, brief and gone. "That," she said, "is a longer story. Would you like to hear it? Or would you rather I simply told you it works out?" The room, almost as one, leaned forward. "Then let me show you a name that isn't on the wall yet," she said, "because the story isn't finished. 3 sectors over, in a training compound that smelled of sea salt and gun oil, Agent Renata Cole was halfway through her 4th coffee of the morning when the alert chimed on her wrist unit. Cole. She didn't look up from the report she was annotating. "New flag, track 7, said the voice on the other end, Halvorsen, the team's analyst, a man who sounded perpetually like he hadn't slept, mostly because he hadn't. Low confidence. Might be nothing. Might be nothing was Halvorsen's way of saying probably not nothing. Cole set the datapad down. "Talk to me. Supply requisition anomaly out of the Ver Colony Resupply Depot. 6 discrepancies over 4 months. Small stuff, a case of rations here, a medical kit there. Wouldn't even register except..." A pause, the sound of him pulling something up. "Except the depot serves a EPOL settlement. 90% civilian, mostly families relocated after the border skirmishes. No military value at all. Cole's jaw tightened, just slightly. It was the only outward sign she gave, which means someone's not stealing for profit. Or they are, and just found the one place with the least oversight and the least ability to complain, Halvorsen said. I don't love either read. Neither do I. She stood, already reaching for her jacket. Pull the personnel roster for that depot. Everyone with clearance in the last 6 months. And Halvorsen, yeah? Flag it soft. No alerts to command yet. If this is what I think it is, I want to be the one who finds him before he finds out we're looking. There was a beat of silence on the line, the kind Halvorsen only gave her when he understood exactly what she meant and didn't like it. You know, if it turns out to be nothing, you just spent a full workup on 6 missing ration packs. If it turns out to be nothing, Cole said, already moving toward the transport bay, then I got to spend an afternoon being wrong, and nobody got hurt. That's a good day, Hal. That's the best kind of day this job has to offer. She didn't say the other half of the thought, the one she never said out loud to anyone, not even her own team, that every requisition anomaly, no matter how small, arrived in her chest like a held breath, because she had learned the hard way in her second year on Track 7 exactly how quickly small stuff became a name on the ledger, with her own name written in smaller letters beneath it. She had learned what it looked like when someone crossed the line by inches instead of leaps, convincing themselves the whole way down that inches didn't count. The transport doors sealed behind her with a soft hydraulic hiss. 6 hours later, the Ver Colony Depot rose out of a dust-orange horizon, a squat gray structure ringed by prefab housing units, laundry lines strung between them, and a scattering of EPAL children chasing something small and fast across a dirt lot. Cole watched them through the transport's viewport for a moment before she moved. Halvorsen had narrowed the personnel list down to 4 names by the time she landed. 3 cleared quickly. Long service records, no financial irregularities. One of them a grandmother twice over who'd been with the Confederation Logistics Corps longer than Cole had been alive. The 4th name set differently. Corporal Daniel Price, 26 years old, human, transferred to the Ver Colony Depot 14 months earlier, following what his file dryly described as a disciplinary reassignment from a combat unit, the kind of phrase that meant something worse had happened, and no one wanted it in writing. He lived alone in the human quarter of the compound, kept to himself, and had, according to 2 separate colleague statements Halvorsen had already pulled, strong opinions about resource allocation to non-human dependents. Cole read that phrase 3 times. She didn't go to him directly. That was the first rule Track 7 drilled into every recruit, the one that separated the job from simple manhunting. You do not confirm a suspicion by giving the subject a reason to become certain you're there for him. Instead, she spent the first day walking the depot in a supply corps jacket that wasn't hers, cross-referencing manifest logs against actual inventory, counting boxes with her own hands in a warehouse that smelled of machine oil and stale recycled air. The discrepancy pattern told its own story once she laid it out properly. Not theft for profit. Halvorsen had been right to worry about the other read. Every missing item had gone to shipments bound for the EPAL settlement specifically. Never the human quarter, never the mixed housing blocks. Only the settlement, methodically, a little at a time, in amounts small enough that any single shipment looked like ordinary shrinkage rather than a pattern. On the second evening, she found the children again, the same lot, the same game, something involving a scavenged ball and rules that seemed to exist only in their heads. A small Ipo girl, maybe the equivalent of 6 or 7 human years, sat on the sidelines with her leg wrapped in a bandage, clearly meant for something much larger than her, the wrong size, cut down crudely to fit. "That doesn't look like it's healing right," Cole said, crouching down beside her, keeping her voice easy. The girl eyed her with the particular wariness Ipo children learned early. "Depot said the good bandages ran out. Mama says we get what's left." Cole smiled at her, the kind of smile that cost her something to produce, because underneath it something in her chest had gone very still and very cold, and told her it looked like a fighter's wound, the kind that healed into a good story later. The girl seemed to like that answer well enough to go back to her game. Cole did not go back to her transport that night. She sat instead in the human quarters small commissary, nursing a drink she didn't finish, until Corporal Daniel Price walked in a little after 2200 hours, exactly as his logged routine said he would. He was younger looking in person than his file photo suggested. Unremarkable, the kind of face that blended into a crowd, which she supposed was rather the point of most of the names on the wrong side of the ledger. "Corporal Price," she said, and watched him go still in the doorway. "Agent Cole, Track 7. I think you already know why I'm here, so I'm going to save us both some time and skip the part where you pretend you don't." He didn't run. That surprised her a little. The ones who'd convinced themselves they were justified rarely did. Instead, he sat down across from her, slow and deliberate, the same rehearsed calm she'd seen in the recording from 3 days ago, the one she'd shown 100 times to 100 rooms of alien children, though she'd never know it. "They took my brother's unit," he said, without preamble. "Apple contractors flagged the extraction coordinates late. Whole squad gone, because some translator got a decimal point wrong. And I'm supposed to make sure their kids get double rations while my own division, back home, can't get resupplied fast enough?" "That's not what happened to your brother's unit," Cole said quietly. "I read the incident report on the way here. It was a human logistics officer who misfiled the coordinates. Ipple Command flagged the error and tried to recall the strike twice. It didn't reach your brother's unit in time because the relay tower serving that sector had been damaged in the same offensive that killed him. There was no translator. There was no decimal point. There was a war, and war kills people. And you have decided that a 6-year-old on a dirt lot outside this window owes you a debt her whole species didn't create." Something in his face cracked just slightly, the practiced calm slipping. "You don't know what it's like." "I know exactly what it's like," Cole said, and for the first time her voice lost its careful flatness. "I have buried people too, Corporal. Every agent on my team has." "That's not the line. The line was never grief. The line is what you did with it. You didn't drink too much or pick fights or spiral in ways that only hurt yourself. You found the quietest, least defended people on this entire depot, and you decided they were an acceptable place to put your anger, a little at a time, so small nobody would notice until a child's leg healed wrong, because the bandage that should have been hers went missing on a manifest." He said nothing. His hands, she noticed, had curled into fists on the table between them, not raised, not moving toward her, just closed, the way hands closed when a person was holding something in rather than letting it out. "Here's what happens now," Cole said, and her voice had gone level again. calm as still water. "You're going to stand up and you're going to walk with me to the transport. And you are not going to make me explain to that little girl's mother why there was a struggle in the commissary tonight. You are going to face a tribunal. It will not be gentle, and it should not be, but it will be fair, which is more than you gave any of them." For a long moment, Price didn't move at all. Cole watched his hands, watched the muscles along his jaw, watched every small physical signal her training had taught her to read in her own species faster than any psychic scan the Confederation could offer, because whatever else was true about humans, they were not unreadable to each other, not really, not to someone who'd spent 9 years learning to look. Then his shoulders dropped all at once, like something had finally let go inside him, and he stood. She didn't touch him on the way out. She didn't need to. That she had learned long ago was the part the rest of the galaxy never quite believed about this job, that the vast majority of it ended not in violence, but in a tired man walking quietly toward a transport, because somewhere underneath the anger and the excuses, most of them still knew the difference between right and wrong, and simply needed someone else to hold up a mirror long enough for them to see it too. The ones who didn't, the ones whose hands moved first, whose faces held nothing behind the eyes when confronted, those were the names that ended up on the ledger the hard way. Cole had 4 of those to her name across 9 years. She remembered every one of them by name, by face, by the exact weight of the decision she'd had to make in the seconds available to her. She did not consider that number something to be proud of. She considered it something to be honest about, the way a surgeon might be honest about the patients they couldn't save. Halvorson's voice crackled through her earpiece as she guided Price up the transport ramp. "Confirmed, then?" "Confirmed," Cole said. "No injuries. Added to the log. Gold column." She looked back once at the dirt lot, empty now in the dark, at the prefab housing with its strung laundry lines catching the last of the compound's floodlights. "Gold column," she said. Back in the lecture hall, Miss Reike closed the file on Corporal Daniel Price and let the display go dark for a moment before bringing up one final image. Agent Cole, 3 days after the Ver Colony incident, standing at the edge of the ledger wall on Earth, one hand resting flat against the cool stone beside a name that hadn't been added to it. "She didn't add his name," Cendric said slowly, working it out, "because he didn't cross the line all the way." "No," Miss Reike agreed. "The ledger only holds the ones who couldn't be brought back. Corporal Price will spend the next several years of his life in a rehabilitation program that the Confederation itself helped design, precisely because Track 7 insisted it be built." Agent Cole argued for 4 years in front of committees who did not want to hear it, that a species capable of choosing to walk toward the mirror instead of away from it deserved somewhere to stand once they'd been made to look. She won that argument. It is, by her own account, the accomplishment she is proudest of above every apprehension on her record. She looked around the room at her students. Ashel, with his 4 still eyes, Tynel curled protectively into her own chair, Cendric leaning forward with his tail forgotten behind him, all of them quiet in the particular way that meant a lesson had finally landed somewhere it would stay. "This is what I need you to understand when you go home tonight and you see a human in the market, or standing at a transit platform, or sitting 3 seats down from you at a soup counter," Miss Reike said. "You will not know by looking which kind of predator stands in front of you, because they do not announce it, and psychic scans will not tell you either. But you will also not know by looking which one of them has spent the last 9 years quietly making sure 4,190 of their own kind never got the chance to become something the rest of us needed to fear. The truth the whole galaxy keeps refusing to sit with is that both of those facts are true about the same species, often within the very same family, sometimes within the very same person, at 2 different points in one difficult life. She reached back and switched off the display, the room dimming into ordinary afternoon light. Humanity's bloodlust is real, she said, quietly now, more to herself than to the class. I will never stand here and tell you otherwise because the data does not allow it, and neither does my conscience. But it is only half of what they are. The other half is the reason that number of red dots on my map isn't 10 times larger than it already is. Remember both halves. Fear the first if you must. I will not tell you your fear is unearned. But do not let it blind you to the second, because it is the second half that has been standing quietly at the edge of the galaxy's worst nights, since long before any of us understood we needed them there. The bell chimed, softer this time, and no one moved to leave right away.